A very warm good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for having joined this faculty development program, which has been organized by Sriram College of Commerce. And as I already mentioned in my introductory remarks, we remain committed to provide quality education to our students, to our faculty, and anybody who is associated with the brand of Sriram College of Commerce. As educationists, this is our primary objective. Um, During this session, I have been told that there are participants from various backgrounds. We have several of you who belong to the OB background, but there are also some who have a background of either management or in HRM or even alternate domains of academics. The idea today, when we are going to discuss, is the research in social sciences and also in the organizational behavior domain. The idea would not necessarily be to teach you the tools which are important for research writing, because it is going to be a broader interaction that I'm going to share with my participants. I would prefer an interactive session with you. You could be putting up your remarks in the chat box. You could raise your hands. You could unmute yourself, because that is what would add interactive spirit to this particular session. Beginning with the word research, and if you see, there are three key terms in the topic that we are going to handle today: research in social sciences and organizational behavior. So, what is this research? What is social sciences? And how organizational behavior is a component of the social sciences? Now, when we discuss research, often who are the people who are doing the research in social sciences? They could be the people in the academic world, they could be the faculty members, they could be PhD scholars, they could be organizations who have undertaken the research, there could be the consultancy organizations which have taken up a research. Ultimately, the objective is generally that the research must have outcomes wherein policies can be implemented at an economy level, at a firm level, at an organizational level, in such a manner that the overall productivity, whether it is for the economy or for the firm or for the organization, goes up. The question is, how do we define productivity? Different concepts would be coming up depending upon whether we are talking primarily in the context of financial ratios, or is it more holistic and encompassing a broader function, something like mindsets of the people, because that is also contributing to the overall productivity and well being of a nation. And we do know from the kind of research that is happening globally that gross domestic product is only a monetary number. And the growth rate of the gross domestic product is totally monetary in nature. And sometimes it is happening at the cost wherein the people are not too happy with the kind of growth that is taking place. Also, at the same time, it is possible that the very vast growth rate that is taking place is not even sustainable over time, because you might end up resources which are much beyond the requirement of the present generation. So this kind of GDP growth is also certainly not a welcome one. And anytime GDP growth is coming at the cost of stress levels in the economy, at the cost of the, let's say, heart attacks which are happening to the younger generation, wherein the mindsets are not comfortable. This again is not the spirit with which we want to see the growth of a particular country. Similarly, when we are talking about organization, especially in the spirit of the organizational behavior, are productivity estimates wherein you want that the overall efficiency and competitiveness of the organization must go up. But at the same time, you want to keep your employees first approach. You don't want this kind of a growth coming up where your workers are working overtime, where there are conflicts within an organization, and where there is no job satisfaction. So, what is going to happen if you are going to have very high productivity for 2 years in a particular organization where their employees are not happy? Extreme amount of turnover will be there. Retention rate of the employees would not be strong. So you want that your employees first approach, or at least taking care of the employees, the managers, is equally important as much as the profitability of the company. And as we say, people, profit, and planets all have to go together. But it's not necessary that all of them are aligned in the same direction. There are trade offs. Sometimes, when you're trying to work towards a better, effective society, you may end up making your workers less effective in terms of their job satisfaction. Similarly, when you're trying to have higher profitability of an organization, it may not necessarily be good for the sustainability of that organization in terms of the energy footprints that this particular organization is leaving behind. Now, organizations, if they think of themselves as a silos, independent of the overall structure of an economy, this is something extremely wrong. But rather regrettably, this is what most of the companies do. They think if I don't adopt this particular energy intensive technology, others will do that. And when others will do that, they will overtake us. And this kind of a rat race makes each organization adapt to the dynamic world for survival. But the survival here is a short term survival rather than the sustainable and the long term survival. It goes without saying that any kind of a sustainable development, whether of an organization, whether of a firm, whether of the country's growth, must depend upon inclusiveness, wherein every stakeholder is incorporated as a part of the entire process. Simultaneously, we also must ensure that the carbon footprints each organization or the country is doing are kept well under control, totally aligned with the IPCC declaration of what should be the global warming upper limit in terms of the degrees and the temperatures that we have defined for ourselves globally. Now, if the objective of a research, let us say largely, is the objective function, we want to improve the effectiveness of an organization, of a firm, what are the parameters based upon which you would do? You'll have to undertake some kind of a research, and you have to read up the literature in this dimension. You have to look up what are the inputs which are going in. And if you understand the very word research, I take this opportunity to actually share the definition of organizational research, which was given by Zora Neale Hurston. This was given in the year 18, her lifespan was 1891 to 1960. And the terms used are so beautiful. It says research is an activity of gathering, analyzing, and interpreting information for meaningful insights. So perfectly all right. So you have to gather information, you have to analyze information, and finally meaningful insights have to come out of it. But what is important is research is a formalized curiosity. You have to be curious. So when you are doing research, your curiosity has to take the better of you. And the second aspect with which is, it is poking and prying with a purpose. So you have to poke someone, and who's the someone over here? Your data sets, the people from whom you are extracting the data, and you have to pry. And in a normal English terminology, generally these terms of poking and prying generally are negative connotations. Certainly they're not positive. He's poking, he's prying, he's putting his nose into my kind of a work. But if a researcher doesn't do that with this kind of a data set, you will never be able to get the best of the research. So research, you must poke your data, you must pry your data, you must eat your data, sleep your data, walk your data. You have to be in love with your data. It comes out to be as simple as that. And data could be qualitative, it could be quantitative. I'm not getting into that. But whatever are the parameters with which you have to undertake your research, you have to fall in love with that. Not easy, especially for a PhD scholar, because in the initial few months, the frustration levels of being a doctoral student are actually immense. When you get enrolled for a PhD, you're very happy. So 5-6 months is a lack attitude. Okay, I've got my admission. And then your supervisor also may not be nudging you or prying you or poking you how much you've done. So you are comfortable. Oh, nobody's bothering me, I'm fine. But then comes in your 1.5 years have gone by and you've practically done very less. And all that you've done is read papers, but there's nothing concrete which has come up. and there's no publication whatsoever. So the frustration levels are now going to come in. But believe me, by the time closer to your fourth year, there are so many dots to this research which automatically get connected, provided you are working throughout the time span. And you then start enjoying your research so much that you do not want to have any disturbing you because you're immersed with your research with which you have fallen in love with. And then comes the question, if you've fallen in love with research, what should be the work-life balance? My answer to that, anything you are in love with, you will automatically make the other results. So something which you are not enjoying, there comes the question of how to balance my life, which we will discuss at a little later point in time. So if research is to analyze the data, interpret the data, come out with meaningful insights, and then it must have some kind of a policy implication which can be implemented. Of course, all kinds of research are not scalable. Replicability is also sometimes not there because they're very specific to a particular organization. So we are fine with it. There may not be replicability, there may not be scalability, but so long as it for that particular case study, it is an effective medium of a policy implementation, this particular research becomes then an A category research. Now, when we are talking about research, the important thing is why is research so poor in general in the Indian context and more so in the social sciences? Why is it that India is nowhere in the global rankings when it comes to the research in social sciences? Practically very poor researchers. And I join in saying that as an academician, this major directional change in the emphasis which research is to be given very new, just about 10 or 12 years ago. Students were not aware, faculty was not aware what an H index was, what an impact factor was, what is the ABDC listing and how best to go about it. Very few of us had the privilege of having contacts in the international academic industry, knowing that research is important and what these H factors and impact factors are. But everybody did not know. In fact, many of us did not know the importance of research, quality research, and publication of this quality research in a quality journal. UGC is the smallest of the subject in which we are all trying to have our publication. Scopus comes in a little above that. And Scopus and UGC, you think you're very well covered. And we are not even aspiring to publish in A+ category journals. It is a time-consuming process. There could be so many rejections that you face. You could get major revisions in your research. Nonetheless, the idea is to inform the participants today. Number one, research in general is rather regrettably not substantial, neither in quantity nor in quality presently, though there has been a major improvement in the past few years. I take it in the positive manner. It simply means that there are miles to go, and we have those miles to go because there is a lot of gap that can be bridged. And I'm very happy that many of my scholars and my teachers over here who are participating in this program are going to be the torchbearers of the future research in the right direction or with the right quality. Also, I would like to say what lacks in the present research, in addition to the in general poor quality and poor quantity, it lacks interdisciplinarity. What do we mean by interdisciplinarity? People who are working in the domain of, let's say, organizational behavior are comfortable using the tools of an organizational behavior. When you're talking of an individual, you are comfortable in applying tools of psychology to the OB level. When it comes to the team behavior, it's sociology, anthropology, and you are comfortable over there. But integration with the other domains, and let me say domains of management, is often lacking. It is also the case with economics, finance, marketing, supply chain management, productions and operation management. And in the new education policy, a big thrust has now been given to interdisciplinarity between the various research topics, research areas. and it is being promoted. So if you're working in the area of organizational behavior, try to have a co-supervisor, let's say from finance, economics, marketing, so that there is an integration of interdisciplinarity between the research. To some extent, this interaction has taken place in the domain of economics and finance. Most of the economics and finance, there is an overlap between the kind of topics. So long as it is not development economics, most of the economics which are growth oriented topics do very often also have concepts of finance in it. When we talk about the finance, it's the banking sector. The tools of the economics have also been picked up, but largely marketing still is working in a silos. Largely organizational behavior is still working in a silos. So how do we integrate? And of course, the data sets that are available in other disciplines are different from the ones which are going to be available in OB. But I'm sure with the kind of knowledge sharing that takes place in workplaces, whether in the university or whether in corporations, there are going to be common points of bringing in interdisciplinarity into the research. Allow me to then move over to the next dimension of the research where we are in general lacking and we have to take it forward is we are lacking in dealing with contemporary topics. So if somebody is working with work-life balance, practically the whole of the team would be working on this. You have to introduce contemporary topics into your research in addition to trying to make it interdisciplinary. And also, if it is scalable and replicable, that would be, of course, the best kind. But even if you're not able to do that, your research should be contemporary. When I guide my doctoral students on a particular topic, they come back very disheartened after a week. Ma'am, हमने तो इतना कोशिश किया, कोई भी literature review नहीं मिला. So they take it as a negative point. Oh God, there's nothing to fall back on. I say this is the best part of your research that you're not getting any review of literature in this domain. That means you are going to be amongst the initial people to do this particular research. So what is the contemporariness in your research is what you, along with your guide or you independently have to decide upon. Now, in today's world, what could be contemporary? It's all about the pandemic. So how many researchers have now decided that 6 months from now, their research is going to be taking into account the disruptions that have taken place on account of the pandemic that has hit the global economy. And when I say it's a disruption, I'm not necessarily saying it's a destruction. So there's a difference between disruption and destruction. But adaptability to both is important. With a positive attitude is even more important, because if you're not doing with a positive attitude, you end up ruining your own mindsets. And this will ultimately affect not just you, but the organization in which you're working. So if it is a pandemic, what is required? From an organizational behavior perspective, just think how have the organizations changed? All of a sudden, technology has moved from the offices, which are the workplaces, to your home places. There are no workstations. Your homes have become your workstations. And at your workstations, you are now also handling your home front, because most of the people who might be assisting you at home, let's say in terms of your domestic staff, they may not be there if it's a lockdown period. So you're taking care of it's becoming a multitasking system. And with some of the colleagues that I have shared my experiences, the day the lockdown was announced and work from home had automatically started, we were in a 3-4 days not knowing how to adapt. Relatively free days, because the new technique that had to be adopted, we had not decided upon that. How to strategize ourselves, we had not decided upon that. But then within a week, the comfort zone came. And most of the organizations, and I'm talking largely upon the multinational organizations over here, right at the beginning, they started sending questionnaires to their employees. How was their outlook to the work from home? And every 3 to 4 weeks, every month, this kind of a questionnaire is floated to their employees at all levels, low level, middle level, senior level. And you'll be surprised that the responses that they are getting have actually changed over time. So right at the beginning, let's say at the end of the first week, you ask, how are you feeling working from home? Many of them said, we are not comfortable and we are looking forward to going back to the offices. And they thought that their productivity levels had also impeded adversely because it's an impediment. But and also mindsets play an important role, because when you are going to your workstation for work and others are staying back, they ask for leave, but leave which is work from home leave. During your coffee breaks, you say, "Arey, usne to work from home le liya, pata nahi kitna kaam kar rahi hogi." You generally look down upon a person who has applied for a work from home. In India, especially so. But today we've realized, and many of the workers are saying that with work from home, they're actually ending up working more than what they used to work while they were in the organization. Organization, whatever time it was, 11 to 8, 9 to 5, typically those were the hours that were devoted to the organization, and you would come home. But that doesn't mean that just because you're ending up working more, you're less satisfied. People have actually started seeing new comfort zones in their workplaces and have adjusted. And the company responses, which have all I've tried to gather in responses, we do know that in the first month, let's say many people, 90% wanted to come back to the offices. After a month, the responses were, no, we are fine at home, but on certain days we would like to come, let's say 3 days to office and 2 days at home is fine. A little later, the structure is changing so much so that in the recent surveys over time, it has been seen that people would like to come to the office, but maybe only on one day a week. And the rest of the days, they are fine working from home. Earlier, you would not be comfortable even in giving the right response that you would like to prefer a work from home. Why? Because in general, we are looking down upon people who are working from home. But it's now not accepted, and if you are staying back at home, you are going to be less effective. So people have become more open to actually share their responses. And there comes in a challenge for a researcher. When you're trying to give a questionnaire to a particular person, how truthful will your responses be to that? Especially if the response is related to how stressed are you working at home. You think, oh my God, if my data is going to be shared with my boss, maybe my next promotion is going to be impacted. So even if you're stressed, you prefer not to put the extreme stress situation because you don't want your anybody else to know that you're stressed. So when this kind of a data is shared by the organizational head, it always comes with a confidentiality. One, if you don't want to share, we are fine. There is no compulsion. Two, even if you're sharing, it is going to remain totally confidential to enable us have appropriate policies to deal with your stress levels. And this happens across most of the questions because questionnaire-based analysis are going to be perception-based also. What you perceive to be good, your friend or your colleague could perceive to be exceptionally good. And it can also be that what you perceive to be extremely bad, others could be perceiving it in a very, very positive manner. So perceptions are individuals, and that is where the psychology of the person plays an important role when you are undertaking research in the area of organizational behavior. So I spoke about first what are the challenges of research in social sciences and said quality and quantity both are in general not at the optimal levels. We also spoke about the second aspect where we said there is lack of interdisciplinarity and contemporary topics are not being used. Simultaneously, I would also like to mention even the tools used to analyze the data are not state of the art. Sometimes we continue to use tools which were more appropriate during the 70s and 80s, but with the advancement of the softwares, if we have not upgraded ourselves, our research will continue to remain at a little lower level. And computers, which is my industry 4, if I talk about, industry 4 has totally revolutionized some of the way in which research is taking place. Some say that industry 4 is not a revolution, it is an evolution because it is originating from the computerization and digitalization which took place in the 1980s. But the present speed of the data, velocity of the data, variety of the data, volume of the data is so immense that you need to analyze the data on platforms, on softwares which are totally different from the erstwhile softwares. R is a package which is now much in demand. Why? Because it is able to deal with the real-time big data analytics. If 3D printing has come in, if chains have come in, if big data has come in, automatically you have to orient your analysis accordingly. Sometimes even regulatory authorities are not comfortable or have not adapted to the changing circumstances. And I take the case of, let's say, all those companies which are on digital platform, let us say Amazon, Flipkart, Ola, Uber, they have adopted policies where the erstwhile brick and mortar system or the erstwhile general motor systems is totally out of tune because, for example, in Uber and Ola, you are not even owning a single taxi, you're not even owning the driver, yet your revenues are at par with the General Motors, which is such an old company of repute. So what did these youngsters do with the digital platform? This is extremely important. Similarly, you have other cases where it is important for us to understand how to orient ourselves. The algorithms with which pricing is now taken on, let's say, Flipkart or Amazon, it's an algorithmic based pricing. And we don't even know whether the algorithms are true algorithms or they have seeds of black boxes in them, seeds of gray boxes, gray areas, which neither the consumer knows nor the regulatory authorities know. So how should we deal with these is another very contemporary topic of research because new platforms of big data, of Industry 4 evolution will automatically also change the philosophy of doing research. As a doctoral student, we are so fine and so happy that my data set was 1,000 respondents and I analyzed and this is what I get. But with big data, there are millions and millions and millions of people who are actually being analyzed and their behavior is being analyzed. So can we also, let's say in marketing, if not in OB, talk about consumer behavior and how it is impacting the purchase policy and how in turn the organizations have adopted their discount and coupon strategies to target those people who are the potential customers, though they may not be today their customers. So organizations have to adapt. And again, coming to the organizational behavior, if you talk about the three structures, and we are talking about again the challenges that we are facing in research, if your top leadership in the structured hierarchy is not dynamic, is not far-sighted, is not proactive, nothing can happen at the middle rung, which is my teamwork, nor my individuals be able to work in a positive frame of mind. So in order to adapt to this system, it is important that either you can have a top-down approach or a bottoms-up approach. But in major disruptive systems, often the best of the policies that work is a top-down approach, where your leader has decided something, then your teamworks and your individuals are working in alignment with the vision and the mission which has been set up by the organizational structure. Now, when we are talking about, again, the research and the issues of research, what has the new education policy done to improve research in the social sciences and organizational behavior? Number one is just dissemination of information of how important a research is. The National Research Foundation has been set up and a huge amount of 50,000 crore is going to be allocated to the National Research Foundation over a period of 5 years. That means even at the Apex Ministry of Education, we are trying to give a thrust to the research because research, very regrettably, is not at par with the international standards, nor even the standards which we as India would like to have them. In the sciences, we still have patents. Lab-related research is better, publications are better. But in social sciences, somewhere down the line, we have to give us ourselves a big thrust. And therefore, the importance of this faculty development program is to specifically inform the participants that there are miles to run before we become even a good teacher, because an effective teacher must supplement his or her teaching with his own examples, which come from their own research. And anybody who's working in the corporate sector, also, especially in the leadership positions, must either do research themselves or read up the relevant research to enable them adopt appropriate policies which can be implemented. As I said, ultimately the objective is to have growth of the organization or of the country, but which is inclusive and takes all stakeholders alongside, and also at the same time is not necessarily going to add huge amount of footprints to the carbon emissions. That means you have to keep planet happy also. I will now engage with my participants for a couple of minutes before I move up to the next level of my interaction with you. So right now it was only to inform that we are low in quality research, low in numbers of research, low in interdisciplinarity, and low also in terms of contemporariness in both research and implementation. So with that, just you can share your thoughts. It need not necessarily be a question. Vardha, am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible, and there is a comment in the chat box.
People not wanting to come to their organization is a challenge to the managers. They say if you're not enthused to visit office on a Monday, you are in a wrong job. That's what we say, sir, Monday blues, Monday morning blues. So yeah, it can be interpreted. If you're not in a happy mode to go to your office, of course, it is time for change. But as they say that the kind of population explosion India is in, jobs are not available. And unfortunately, the kind of um, experiences that we get during our education is also not aligned with what is requirement at the job. Often many of us are trained on the job. So this industry academia disconnect has to go away. And as a way forward, I think it's very important when I said that if you have National Research Foundation, you must have organizational sponsored research. Industries must sponsor research in higher educational institutions, including, let us say, it is SRCC or any other, so that the research that is happening within the organization or a college is aligned with what is required. And I'm happy to share with my participants two such research projects which we have done is one on the digital platforms. What should be the regulatory and competition mechanisms? Because when most of the companies are going on digital platforms, things have changed. So we have a project, it's a big project that we have got. Another one was during the pandemic times, how do we revive the tourism industry? So we got the project from the tourism sector, and we have submitted the report. So this organizations giving research topics and funded research is the way forward in the right direction.
Ma'am, good morning. Myself, Dr. Salishan Ghosh, ma'am. Ma'am,
Yes, sir.
just want to say some few things of your
Yes,
way
sir.
of the things you are describing, ma'am. It's excellent.
Yes, sir. Yes,
We are
sir.
getting number of things or views, the way we can do the things. But
Yes, sir.
nowadays, actually, the issues is that number of private universities and institutes that came up, and their demand or time period or the administrative activities or academic activities are so much that teachers of private institutes are getting very less time for research engagement, because it's required a continuous engagement of your thought process. Specifically in the OB area, you have to continuously go through these things, and there is so much pressure on this private, specifically in the COVID-19 situation, man. When you are working from home, now it is not a 8 hours working hours. It is more than that. It can be a 12 hours, it can be 15 hours, some of the cases. So with such a workload, we are the people are getting very less time to react on the requirement of the research need. So there is a lots of issues on that. So it's getting delayed, and somewhere people are leaving those concepts behind. They're thinking that's when we'll get a time, we'll maybe able to do it. Let's see. Now, whatever work we have for organization front, we have to do it now. Number of institutes, number of colleges lay off their employees also. There's lots of pressure on that. And to beat out these challenges, there is a number of behavioral pattern changes in the teachers community also. They learn new technology, new things, also new way of communicating the things. And that is brings also opportunity for them. But to think on that, to react on that, and to research, they're getting very less time on that. Definitely, it's generating huge number of data which they can work on that.
Sir, I agree with you, Dr. Shaleshwar. A very, very valid point that the private institutions are asking you to work for long hours and get the need is that you have to be a good researcher if you want to be a good teacher. My way of taking it forward would be, sir, challenges will always arise. And I think you look at it from the point of, again, I don't want to give it a gendered perspective, but often it has been seen that the female workforce is also totally involved with the house activities more than the male counterpart. So expectations are more. Now, how do you then survive in an industry where you also have to take care of your home front responsibilities because nobody else is sharing it over there, and also perform well in the industry where you're working? So creating support systems is important wherever they are. Support systems at workplace, support systems at home place, wherever. My way of looking at this, Dr. Shaleshwar, would be, and I do it often myself, when I became the principal, one of the important questions which was asked to me in the interview panel was, you are basically a researcher at heart. With administration, don't you think your research is going to take a back seat? So taking a back seat depends upon how I categorize. Okay, I know my number of publications will go down, but if it's going to go down to zero, then this is not a position I want to be, because as an effective leader, I have to also showcase my research abilities to my youngsters. And at this platform, I'm very happy to say that there are so many people doing PhD at Sri Ram College of Commerce from very good institutions. Sir, try to have a joint paper. 3 authors should combine. And I'm very sure, sir, you will be able to come out with a good publication within a year's time. So don't do it independently, do it in a cooperative manner, Dr. Shaleshwar. This is my advice to you, though I fully agree with whatever you are saying.
Thank you, ma'am. That's actually we are doing. That's actually, I adopted the same procedure, ma'am. We are three people here, and we are doing the same way. I'm contributing some part, and my friends are contributing some other part, and we are coming out with that particular way.
Yes.
So it's not be an individual paper, but it will definitely joint paper, and that's the way we can overcome this particular problem. That's why we found the solution as you are suggesting, ma'am.
Yes.
That's actually we are doing. Thank you.
I'm very happy, sir. I'm very happy, sir. This way you can multiple papers at the same time. Right. So after the end of the year or two, you'll actually see 3 publications coming up, because, sir, in economics and other fields, we say do what you have a comparative advantage in. So if you have a comparative advantage in econometrics, you pick up that portion of all the 3 papers. A person who has a comparative advantage in English writing style, let that person handle the writing part of the paper. So you can divide your work. Somebody could be very good at questionnaire development. Let that person do that. So it should be a symbiotic relationship, supplement each other's strengths and weaknesses, and a better systems will emerge. And I would also like to say, sir, that when your papers are jointly authored with good people, even the reviewers are happy because the responsibility has been shared amongst good researchers.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Any other queries, sir? Ladies?
Ma'am, good morning, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Dr. Sandeep.
My query is very simple and basic one. Why the conceptual research is not much recognized or much encouraged, especially in countries like India? We always harp on where is the empirical data, where is the, data-driven research is more taken into account, whether it is during PhD or later on. Why do we do so? Why the conceptual research is not being encouraged? What is the main reason?
I'll share my thoughts with you, sir. what happens is that nowadays, I will also share when my publications go to, let's say, a B category journal, and I've done only the econometric part, and I have a model and good results. But my papers have been returned. They say, please give us the section on conceptual framework of your paper. Sir, you please, so what I'm trying to say is, in isolation, only the conceptual framework is also not very good. Only the empirical part of data is also not good. But if you have in a paper, and I'm saying, talking about a paper writing, in that 8,000 word limit, which is generally the word limit of a good journal, there has to be a section of about 1,000 words on the conceptual framework. If you are conceptually wrong, no matter what you do with your data, the results cannot be interpreted in the right spirit. So, sir, my take would be, yes, if there is only a conceptual work, supposing I'm your reviewer, and I want to then say, okay, it's conceptually very strong, but can it be supplemented with data driven? It might be possible that the concept note is actually only a concept note. It cannot be implemented with data backed system. But if in your conceptual paper, you're also providing us that gap, how to convert this conceptual framework into a data driven, believe me, that is the best paper that anybody who's working on empirical will be able to do that. Simultaneously, I want another paper which is data driven, very good data driven, but there's no concept. And I have been returned my own papers, as I just mentioned, because it was lacking on the conceptual framework. And most of the journals now are requiring, sir, the following 5 things on which anybody paper goes: your introduction, which is your background paper, then comes your review of literature, and then comes your own objective and how you're dealing with it. You suddenly in your data, you say data methodology, and it's an econometric work or a cross tabs, whatever you're doing, or a primary or a secondary survey, but there is no conceptual background framework. The recent paper I did was based upon conflict impacting food insecurity. And we know in theory, conflicts will impact food insecurity, because in a conflict driven economy, most of the shops are going to be closed. The students will not be able to go to the schools. Fathers will not be able to earn their monthly earnings. So we know that. But in my econometric work, I just straight away gave the econometric results. And when I did the econometric results, you'll be surprised, for me, the conflict was actually not impacting food insecurity. It had come out to be non-significant. I was uncomfortable, and though the person is not my co-author, I went to another person, and over a cup of coffee, which they say, the knowledge sharing systems, I said, I'm very sure there has to be, and he's my doctoral guide earlier, but not a part of this paper. I said, sir, I know in theory conflicts should impact food insecurity, but my paper is not reflecting. I've tried different model specifications, linear, log linear, but sir, somehow it's not giving me the correct result. And then he thought for a second, and he said, sir, Simrat, how have you defined conflict? So I told him, this is the way I've defined. So he said, look up an alternate method of defining conflict. So I want to use this also for my organizational behavior students who are listening to me. Supposing you want to study conflict in an organization or in a teamwork and its impact on productivity or job satisfaction, your questionnaire should be framed in such a manner, which I have learned over time. Conflict, one time, was not impacting food security. So I took a 3 dummy approach. I said conflict this year, last year, as well as the previous year. So this becomes one category of the countries. All 3 years are conflict driven. What is going to be the impact on your food insecurity? Second category I said was food. There is a conflict this year, but there is no conflict in the previous 2 years. Now, what will be the impact of this on food insecurity? And then I took conflict this year, last year, but not the previous year. So I took these combinations. And the moment I take the combinations, instead of having that quantitative number of conflict, I went into a category variable. And the category variables had to be used as a dummy, because I created 4 sets. And I had my reference category where there was no conflict in all the 3 years. And then I saw how it was impacting the food insecurity. Fantastic results as per the concept clarity had come up, that whenever there is a country which has conflicts in all the 3 years, it is very adversely affecting food insecurity vis-a-vis the reference category where there is absolutely no conflict in all the 3 years. So my take for my students and participants over here would be that when you are addressing conflict nature has changed. It has become a conflict in the teamwork. It could be a conflict with an individual within that organization. It could be a conflict within the team, inter-team, intra-team, whatever. So your questionnaire framing should be such that you must say conflict only in the present team or present times, or also conflict in the other teams and earlier times. And if you are able to capture this longevity of or the continuum of the conflict, it will certainly give you better results on how it is impacting job satisfaction or job turnover or retention rate or even the productivity of that organization. It's an illustration I'm trying to tell you how your questionnaire should be well tested. So pilot testing of the questionnaire is very important, sir, when you're doing it. Your questionnaire, if you suddenly floated in the market, you may not get results which you want. And I'm not saying you're forced to get the results that you want. Now, somebody can question me, ma'am, you use that model and your results showed that conflict did not impact food insecurity. So you cheated on your own self and modified the model so that you could get the results that you wanted to get. Many times we people have to face this. I ask my PhD scholars to run 40 equations before I end up with one particular equation as the final equation. And PhD students are not very happy with their guides because you ask them to do this, and next time when they show you the results, you say, no, this is coming as per the hypothesis or conceptual clarity. So please introduce these two variables, also go back and come back again. Student goes back, and actually by the time those 4 or 5 years is over, that researcher flourishes into becoming such a good researcher. They outpass us. And that is the happiest moment I get when my student comes and tells me, ma'am, I have come to know another modern technique. Why don't we adopt that? So we all learn from each other, and never say that we are trying to change our model to suit our expected results. Our model specifications are wrong. And this is where, if I move on to my next structure, which is there has to be a non-linearity in the models. People are not using that. There has to be model specification with the correct control variables. People are not using it. There has to be a control group. People are not using that. So what uses of this, which has come at a little later point in time. But if you are able to get the connect, and this is very important, so relating conflict with job satisfaction and your turnover in the organization, job turnover. Try to capture the conflict variable. This is a very contemporary topic of handling conflicts in the right spirit, and also make it a variable which is addressing conflict not just in a particular team, but also intra-team and over time. You could give yourself 3 time periods of 1 year each, and then see what is happening. Do you find this interesting enough to apply in your research, which you might do with your OB paper?
To some extent, ma'am, to some extent.
So tell me where the problem is. You'll have to think up of framing the question in such a manner that the right answers. So always, sometimes students, the objective, and it has happened with students who are also in the second year of their PhD. They could be teachers come students. After 2 years, they come to me. They may not be my students. They're just coming to seek, those kind of knowledge exchange. The questionnaire is not even framed in a manner which is going to meet the objective of that research in an econometric. So if you're running an econometric equation, what should be your left hand and your right hand variables? Think about that and already have them in the questionnaire so that you are able to run an OLS or a logic model or any other model that you want to do. You only think in terms of factor analysis and structural equation modeling, but you should go a step ahead. Apply the tools of multinomial logic. But if your factor analysis question not taken a multinomial approach, even though entire data is with you, except that one question which could have become your best left-hand side variable.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, any other, or can I proceed further? Okay, we now move to the next part, that when we are writing a research, I would like to share this as The Making of a Hero. It's by Sunil Kant Munjalji, and we recently also interviewed Sir for this particular book has come up. And it's the Hero Company, and the making of the hero is about the Hero Company and how Hero motorcycles and Hero cycles very quickly actually became the market leaders in both the domains. First domain, which was when the Hero cycles had become the market leader, it was in the pre-liberalization period of new economic policy, and the motorcycle becoming a leader was when the liberalization, privatization, and globalization policies has been initiated. So the question comes, a company which was a leader in a closed environment with too much of red tapeism, with too much of bureaucracy at the government level, with too much of licensing raj, also managed to flourish and become a leader when there were the floods of liberalization opened up. So what were the tools? Ultimately, it comes down to the leadership, to the people who are working in an organization, to the lower level. So when you take it up as a case study, and I think it's a very good book of case study, which you must do, what happened within the organization that not only is the company performing well, but even the employee satisfaction and the retention rates are very high. So there has to be something unique about this particular company. And I was also surprised when I read this book. This company was adopting green initiatives, green energy, much in advance when the globes had not even talking about it, even at the country level, forget about at the firm or the organization level. So how can you be so far-sighted that environment is also a part of you? In fact, now this motorcycle companies, what they have done in their factories, they have kept those plants which die fastest in an environment where CO2 emissions are high or where energy is being disseminated at a very level. This is only to check how long that plant in that factory premises can survive. I doubt if many of the private companies are doing that. It is nowhere even in the list of the many, all right, CSR initiatives, they have to follow, corporate governance, they have to follow. But being green on their own, suo moto, and yet not letting your profitability go down or your market share go down. I think that's the beauty with which the future of sustainable organizations lie. So I would urge many of you to read this book of what are the leadership qualities that did not allow this company to die when liberalization opened up or when the content of energy friendly techniques came up. This was doing all throughout and with technologies much superior sometimes to even to the ones which are present today. So how to go about? Of course, it depends upon how deep your pockets are, undoubtedly, but it also depends upon your vision. And this is the company we are talking about where of the six brothers, the four brothers had set up this organization and they had all come from Pakistan and they had zero money in their pockets. They moved from Agra to Panipat to Delhi to Amritsar and finally settled in Ludhiana where they set up this factory. So it is actually from the very low level of wealth that this particular industry was set up. And another thing which I learned while reading this book was the hero, the brand hero. This gentleman was a Pakistani working somewhere in Ludhiana and he got an opportunity to go back to his own country, Pakistan. And then this brother said that, okay, let's take your name, give us the hero brand, we like it. He says, okay, aap le lijiye. No patent, nothing, no copyright, no money exchange. And hero became, from one company, it went on to become another company's brand. So things are changing, organizations are changing, dynamic environments have come up, Industry 4 has revolutionized, but employees first is the trick in several of the organizations. And I take another example for my participants over here, how employees first can actually also resolve some of the conflicts within an organization. And for this, I back on the research, which is my research in the area of privatization. There was no way that India prior to 1991 could even utter the word of privatizing the public sector units. The government could not come back to power if you use the word, let's privatize the PSUs. But 91, we did that. Why? Because we were in an economic crisis. We had no foreign exchange reserves. We could not import. We had barely less than 2 weeks of foreign exchange to fill up our imports. And the obligations, for obligations, we had borrowed money from the foreigners, foreign banks. That repayment time had come up and there was no money. And on top of it was the Kuwait-Iran war. So the remittances had also stopped. All the Keralites were back in India. Remittances stopped. Foreign obligations in dollars were at the peak and they had to be paid. India could have declared bankruptcy and not paid. We could have done that, but India did not do that. We borrowed money from the IMF and we also pledged our gold in the London Bank, got the money, and then repaid our obligations to all foreign obligations, stood tall in terms of our repayment structures. But this money was given to us on the conditionality that we will be adopting LP policies, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So 91, we started off with the privatization of about 20 companies of PSUs. There were partial disinvestments ranging from 2% to 20% across 20 companies. But the strategic sale is lock, stock, and barrel. You sell it to another party, at least 51% above. And Balco was one such company where we sold it off to Sterlite Industry, a private sector. And when the new owners, the deal took place, the government got the money, but the employees of Sterlite did not allow the Sterlite owners to come into the premises of the Balco, erstwhile Balco, Bharat Aluminium Company. So what happened? 3 months the strike continued and there are losses which are mounting on a daily basis because Sterlite has owned, it's a new owner, but the workers are not with them. So the new MOU which was signed was, okay, for the first few years, we will not retrench any of you, you will all continue. So you satisfied the employees, you satisfied the union and resulted allowed entry of the union into the company. Now, over time, when the privatization wave was to be strengthened, it was decided, why sell it to a private party? Why not sell it to the employees of the company? So the first form of offer was then made to the employees. And if the employees were willing to purchase the company was sold to the employees. So employees became actually the shareholders of the company. And when you become a shareholder, your commitment to work, your job satisfaction, all these things change dramatically. This is another area of contemporary research which you can take up. What is the level in a public sector versus a private sector versus a sector where there is a cooperative attitude towards work vis-a-vis those companies, erstwhile PSUs, which have now been sold up to the employees? How does this job satisfaction vary over time across this? I doubt if many of the studies are taken place, and you must do that. In a public sector, nobody can fire you. Once you are there for all times till the time you get your retirement. In a private sector, you can be fired, but there are so many ways of also motivating you, explicit, tangibles, intangibles, etc. But in a public sector, you neither have a carrot nor do you have a stick. So how do you motivate people? And when in a public sector organization, the leader cannot motivate the people either giving them a monetary incentive or by penalizing them by chucking them out, what is the tool left in the hands of the leader of a public sector? So leader of the public sector also will vary his leadership styles when he moves from a public sector oriented, a government oriented setup to a private sector oriented job. So sometimes you people only study the leadership styles, but take up the leadership styles of those people who have left the public sector and then come to the private sector, or vice versa. You cannot have the same styles. Leadership styles have to change from the kind of situation also at times. Okay, generic, there is some leadership style, but you have to orient yourselves. Yes, please, Dr. Sadhbir.
Sorry to disturb you, ma'am. My submission regarding the public sector. I'm from one of the department which is working in central government. It's a pure, not even public sector, it's a government department. And things have changed as far as hiring and firing is. People are asked to quit if they are not performing. think during last 3 years, it has been totally different, I should say, ballgame. Many have been asked to put in the papers, and not just solely because of the individual's uh, relations, but quite confirmed performative part on our part.
Sure.
So this is somewhat change in
Dr.
attitude,
Sabir,
or
yeah.
whether it is good or bad. I feel it is good because deadwoods are made to move out. There's
Dr. Sabir,
at
I
senior
totally
level.
Yeah, certainly, certainly, sir. I would like to share my own experience, Dr. Sadbir, with the PSUs. I have been fortunate
Ma'am.
enough to be a member of the ad hoc task force, sir, if you are a part of the government or the public sector. So ATF's ad hoc task force, as an economist, I have guided them. There is an MOU which is signed by the public sector with the relevant ministry, and it is routed through the ad hoc task force, and where your objectives are laid down on a year-to-year basis, what you plan to do. And basis this, I totally agree, sir. When MOUs were before 1984, Arjun Sen Gupta committee was not there. Arjun Sen Gupta committee set up the 1984 MOU system. Prior to that, when the PSU would say, I made a profit, it was looked down upon. How can a public sector make a profit? And if you end up making a loss, you said, oh my God, you're not even working properly. Why do you end up making a loss? The public sector did not even know what the objectives were for it. So that was the time when MOUs, and this is important for an organization, target setting. So targets are set according to the nature of your company. For example, if you're Food Corporation of India, you cannot make a profit. You have to buy from the farmers at the minimum support price, which is much higher, and then sell it to the consumer at a public distribution price, which is much lower. So this company will never ever make a profit, but that does not mean that it is an inefficient company. So what do we need to do? We have to set the parameters which will judge the efficiency of Food Corporation of India in a manner different from ONGC, NTPC, BHEL, and or any other oil or other company. And you'll be surprised, sir, in the MOU over the years, I have been associated for a long time. Modi ji dismantled this about 3 years ago, but until then I was associated with loss-making PSUs. I was also associated with Air India. And when we talk with Air India, the managing director, the finance heads, marketing heads, everybody is sitting in front of us. Every question they have to defend what they are doing and why there are losses, and based on what solutions are coming out of that room. It's a very, very high level interaction. I'm totally in agreement with you, Dr. Sadbir. Things have changed. We have changed the structure because now target setting is not just at the top level. It is also given to the departmental level, and it is also then given to the individual level. And if you are not able to meet up to your expected task assigned, then yes, it becomes easier for you to give the pink slip. But sir, imagine a scenario prior to 1985 when there is no task objective for either for the company or for the department or for the person. What do you do? So transparency is very important for effective governance. And I'm happy that the public sector is behaving like a private sector in terms of productivity. Many of my PSU giants are there in Fortune 500 because of their size, but also because over time they have maintained the spirit of remaining competitive in a globalized world. There was does that answer, Dr. Sadbir? Though I'm in agreement with you, so I'm not denying, but things have changed.
Thank you.
Undoubtedly.
Thank you for enlightening with the examples of Air India and others. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Yes, so there was another hand which was raised. I'm forgetting the name, but I did see another hand being raised. Performance management system is not done in banks. Okay, it is. Ma'am, things will change. I mean, I remember when I was a child, I could not even think of Steel Authority of India coming up with an ad. But the moment you, the moment other private companies are competing, we have most of the public sectors also now advertising for them. I remember a classic case of HMT, which we had handled. HMT had become a loss-making unit. And we had then propagated that how do you get even your operational costs? There's no money even to run the operations. So we asked them to close their unit in, probably it was in Connaught Place. They were paying so high a rent. and only one person was handling that. And when we looked up at the photographs, it was all too much of mud and other things. It was not technology savvy. And by that time, Titan had come up as a competitor. So if the public sector is not able to remain as comfortable and competitive as the private sector, it will have implications for its own survival. And we have seen that HMT nowhere is HMT not even anywhere in the discussions today. It's remained a case study, more to say. So there was another hand which was raised. I don't know who it was. Okay, so I proceed further. Now I see, I come back to my right, ma'am. Yes, please.
Sorry, ma'am, but there's Mr. Dr. Ajay Vikram who has written in the
Please.
chat that they have a question. So please, sir, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Sorry, Ajay Vikram. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir. Mr. Vikram. I'm not able to unmute. Okay, so could you please unmute Mr. Vikram?
Yes, I'll just help, sir. Just a moment. So you must be receiving a request to unmute yourself on your screen. Yes. So you're unmuted. You can go ahead.
Ajay Vikram.
So you are unmuted. You can go ahead and speak. Okay, maybe we are still
All
not
right.
able to hear him because of some connectivity
Vikramji,
issues.
the moment you're able to say something, you please start off and then I will keep quiet. Until then, I'm taking the opportunity of moving forward. But as and when you're able to speak, I will stop, sir. Is that okay? Now comes to the next part, which is, let us say, what kind of tools? And please understand, this interaction with you is not on research methodology. It is research in social sciences and organizational behavior. So it's a more of a generic, but one part is the research writing and what kind of tools should you be adopting. When we talk about research, it must have 5 basic components. As I mentioned, your objective should be very clear. And the first section is your background or your introduction. And the last paragraph of this should be, this particular paper has 5 sections. In section 1, this is done. So that flow of the chapter or of the research paper should be there. Then there should be a strong review of literature. And I know my participants here know of different styles of review of literature. It could be any structure that you follow. One thing is most important. Immediately after you have analyzed a particular paper, please give a critique of that paper. And critique, I don't mean necessarily criticism. Critical assessment is actually, if you want, it's a criticism, but it's a constructive critique. And you have to identify the gap. So once you've done 10 or 15 papers, you put it in a tabular manner, you see what kind of methodologies have been adopted, and then you see that, okay, this topic has been studied for this and this country, using this and this methodology for this and this period. However, no such study has been conducted for this particular country using this particular methodology or for the recent time periods. This is the easiest way to identify a gap, because you're not even doing a new topic. You are doing a research topic, but working only on something which is a gap. That's how you're proceeding. Then comes your next part. After your review of literature and you've identified the gap, is how do you want to take it forward? So you say, okay, my objective is this and I propose to this. For doing this, I'm either going to have a primary data collection, or I'm going to be utilizing a secondary data, or there is going to be a combination of my primary supplemented with the secondary data sources. And as I mentioned, always now give the conceptual clarity. It's very important. So when somebody asked me why we are not giving emphasis, sir, primarily we are not giving it so much of an emphasis only on if it is a one particular paper altogether separately. but we wanted to have a symbiotic place along with the econometric part or the quantitative part. Similarly, any paper which is totally quantitative, we want the conceptual part over there. And a paper which is just conceptual, we prefer a quantitative part. But even if it is totally conceptual, it's a strong paper so long as new dimensions have been put in. And I would also take this opportunity, sir, if you read up papers of the top economists today, Amartya Sen, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, most of them are writing conceptual papers. There is no data driven. And I have seen this myself. When you're a young researcher, people don't respect you if you're writing conceptual papers. They want the quantitative techniques, what, etc. But when you have reached a peak, we start appreciating the conceptual papers because the concept that you're developing at that point in time is based upon your vast experience and also the quantitative insights that you've also got over time. So I think it's important, sir, at what level, and I don't want to say age defines your quality of a particular writing, but if you're a young researcher, you've not ventured into quantitative at all and you write a conceptual paper, would not be so welcome as compared to a conceptual paper which is written when the person who's writing has already gone through the cycle phase of having written both conceptual and quantitative and then gone back to conceptual writing. So this is very important. And most of the World Bank papers are now written by very high level scholars, which are conceptual papers, privatization across countries. So they are conceptual papers. So both are important, sir. But yes, in the middle run, the best hit for a good journal, while you are in your, let's say, 25 to 40, have a mix. That is what the publishers are looking for. Now, let me give you 3 or 4 examples of what should the paper proceed like. I've already said quantitative, qualitative, contextual, and then in the methodology part, I'm going to spend some time. But because I'm going to spend time on methodology, allow me to complete the 4th and 5th section and then discuss only methodology. 4th would be interpretation of your findings. And when you interpret your findings, I have been returned my paper several times when at that point in time, I don't say that this finding either corroborates findings of other scholars or it is totally new and it is going against the spirit of other scholars. And my research students get so frightened when they see a research finding which is contrary to existing research. You should not. This is the time for you to recheck your data, whether you've inputted the data correctly. Often the data has been inputted wrongly. Some cut, copy, paste here or there because doctoral work is immense. So please ensure that your files are fine and then go back to concept. And the moment you go back to your concept, your finding will corroborate with what is happening. And I give an example over here. First time when my research scholar said, ma'am, when I'm adding labor to my production function, output is actually falling. And when I'm adding more fertilizers to my production function for agricultural output, the output is actually falling. So just go back and look. We are a country with disguised unemployment, already overstocks of labor. So if you add one more labor, obviously marginal productivity of the additional labor will be negative and your overall productivity will come down. So absolutely fine in a labor surplus economy. So don't get frightened with how can adding more labor contribute to less productivity. It is largely a family-based farm that you are talking about. Similarly, if it's fertilizer, for a fertilizer, the ideal combination is 4:2:1, nitrogen, potassium, etc. But if you add more fertilizer with where the ratio is not 4:2:1, but something different, and you just because fertilizers are so cheap, even cheaper than the common salt, excess fertilizers when they are given to the same piece of land are not good. If in one pot I grow 1,000 seeds of rose, not a single rose will come. So excess of things are bad. So if you're getting a negative coefficient, it means it is excess. You have to actually withdraw. So respect your own finding, defend your own finding, but please ensure that data is correct so that you are able to defend it correctly. For this, your context, your contextual background is going to be very important. If you read a paper of America and agricultural productivity, adding more labor will 100% add to productivity because it is a labor shortage country. But you can't replicate the results for a developing labor surplus economy. Similarly, even in organization settings, you have had several mergers and acquisitions which have actually failed because the cross-cultural differences could not be mitigated post the merger. So why is it some mergers are successful? Why is it some mergers are not successful? Your team dynamics plays a role. And therefore, it is important for you to understand where cross-cultural interactions gel, where they do not gel. And we have a separate paper in management where we teach how to handle cross-cultural differences so that in instances like mergers and acquisitions, we are able to reap only the benefits of economies of scale and mitigate the problems which are coming with teamwork, which are interpersonal. Sometimes in economics, we are very comfortable talking about social groups and their impact on productivity. And we see SC, ST, OBC, and general category people and their productivity in an organization. But in organizational behavior, I don't often see when you talk about how social groups could also impact their job satisfaction or their retention levels. It's an area which is very quiet. In economics, we are very comfortable even in talking about how religion impacts food security or growth. So if it's a sample, we know how Muslims are reacting, how Christians are reacting, how Sikhs are reacting, how Hindus are reacting. But in organizational behavior, we don't want this to be explicitly mentioned. But unless you know the culture from which the person is coming, whether it is in terms of the social group or it is in terms of the religious background, you will then have a one size fits all kind of a policy, which may not be so. And you have to be subtle in your approach because not everybody wants to be explicitly demarcated as a particular category. But please understand, smooth flow of an organization or of a country must have equal opportunities to all. Not outcomes, but opportunities. And if you see a certain segment of your social group has not been given equal opportunity, the company can take up upon itself that disadvantaged social groups are also given an equal opportunity at the workplace if they are not being given so. So these are some of the things which one must take up in the OB levels. Allow me, I think I'm running short of time. So 2-3 things which I had thought of speaking with you on methodology was, first of all, ensure that your variables are all correct. As I mentioned, that gender should be there, age should be there. Social groups you can add because it's a primary data that is being collected. So have a holistic variables. Second is, sir, many you are not even handling non-linearity. It's a linear model you are all working with. So non-linearity could be an interaction term. Let's say we say independently, we say males are more job satisfied than females. Next is females are contributing more towards home than the males, and then their job satisfaction. What is the interaction? What if you're a male and you're also the sole responsible person handling your home? Then you see what would be the effect on organization. And an important thing over here would be research and training. What if you train your employee? What would be its effects on productivity, firm productivity, organizational productivity? And what if there is a conflict in that team? What would be its effect on the productivity of that organization? Independently, you've studied the effect of conflict on productivity or efficiency. Independently, you've seen the effect of training on productivity. First impact, generally negative. Second, generally positive. Conflict, negative impact. Training, positive. Now, what do? Interact the term. So your new variable should be, what if the team is in flirt and what if the team is also given a training? You might see that the coefficient of the interacted term is actually again positive, which means by training that team which is in a conflict actually converts the negative impact and ultimately gives you a positive impact. So interactions are important. Many of the organizational studies have not even introduced, are generally not introducing interaction terms. And interactions are generally going to happen in dummy variable concept. It's a 0, 1, 2 because that's the way you will be restructuring your variable. So ensure that non-linearity is accounted for. Ensure there are interactions, not one, but multiple. Also, sirs, very often it says age matters. And you take age as the age of the person or experience of the person and see its effect on job satisfaction or productivity. But age is a non-linear. You cannot study the effect of age on productivity assuming there's a linear relationship. What is the non-linearity? You must have another variable which is an age square. And age square generally will be negative, which means with age, whatever it's increasing, but it is increasing at a decreasing rate. And this, your own data sets, you'll be able to do that. So introduce non-linearity by interaction terms, by squaring a particular term. Your left-hand variables don't have them as a simple OLS. You should move in for multinomial logic. Categorize whatever it is. The recent paper I read up was impact of spirituality on job satisfaction and firm productivity. So you have to classify the levels of your spirituality, whether it is transcendental domain or it is spiritual domain or whatever it is. So this is again a classification on your right-hand side. Your left-hand side is also a classification. How you're defining your questionnaire will tell you. So your questionnaire setting, your pilot testing of the questionnaire, your sample tests of the questionnaire, your validity of questionnaire is extremely, extremely important. And then comes the perception based. What if you're not getting, it's all is a perception based. I travel from here to Connaught Place when I have to face an interview in Connaught Place and Uber is giving me a hike of 1.4. The search that is coming is 1.4. I don't mind this. It doesn't even click my mind because I reach my target place on time. But if I have to go to a kitty party and I want a Uber, then I'm not too happy when it is asking for a multiplier, which is 1.4. So 1.4 per se is neither high nor low. It depends upon where and for which purpose I'm going to use it for. Similarly, in your question, if you are not able to address this, how incentives impact your productivity or something, you must have classifications of what exactly is required. Vardha, you'll have to tell me my time, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, you have around half an hour.
Okay. So then comes another matter where we talk about, let us say, this particular aspect when your company is willing to pay you a particular incentive to come to the company for work. Now the question is, supposing it is your anniversary day, a 20% hike may or may not motivate you to go to the company on that particular day. So that incentive is not enough if it's in your anniversary day. But if it's a normal day, 20% is enough because you would prefer to have some additional, assume you are a daily wager or something like that, and you are very comfortable with that extra money. Or it could be a New Year's Eve. If it's a New Year's Eve, you say, oh, even 30%, I'm not willing to stay back in the office. But if the office says that we are in dire need, it is an emergency, etc., you may be willing to work even with a 0% extra incentive given to you. So what is the incentive structure that has to be provided to you work extra depends upon the nature of the urgency vis-a-vis what are your family circumstances. So there is a demand side and there is a supply side. There is you who's involved and there is a company that is involved. And your own behavior will change depending upon your own personal backgrounds vis-a-vis the reason for which the company is calling you. So your questionnaire must have these things. Otherwise, if you just say, would 20% incentive assist you to work harder in the company and work longer hours? May not. So what is the may or may not? You must have those as your option list. So when we are discussing all these, and let us say we are talking about scenario building in organizational behavior or in social sciences, something which has really emerged these days is case study oriented, and such case studies often could also be contextual. They need not necessarily be data driven. And I would like to hear the views of some of my participants over here to enable me then take my next 7-8 minutes addressing their thought processes or sharing their thoughts, trying to resolve their thoughts, or even just listening to their thoughts.
Ma'am, good morning. This is Dr. Priya Sengupta. Ma'am, currently during this pandemic situation, I'm conducting a research on employees, those who left their jobs in from the academic field. But there are 7 employees from different colleges who left their job because of a negative situation that has been created in the institution or the organization, which forced them to move. But there are certain employees, those who are staying back because of the financial condition in the family or whatever family it is. But these 7 employees from different colleges, they left. Now what I am trying to do is I'm trying to conduct an interview method, like not questionnaire, because I want the questions are open-ended questions. And why open-ended question is because I need to understand the 7 people, the different reason and the survival technique that they're going to use henceforth if they don't get job for next 2 to 3 years. Now my question is, shall I convert this into a case study or can I give paras of interviews or the reply that I got from the respondents? How am I supposed to be going about it when it comes to presenting it as a case study, or that's what my question is.
Ma'am, could you tell me, is it a part of your doctoral work or is it an independent research?
No, it is a research paper. It's a research paper I want to write.
Okay, all right. Okay, so ma'am, sometimes the depth with which you have to go for a PhD need not be the same when you have to go for a independent research paper. In this case, ma'am, always try to first of all identify how many data points you have. So if you have only 7 data points, ma'am, you cannot conduct a quantitative analysis to it. Okay, so for any decent size, there should be at least your sample should be 30, 40. That's the minimum we want. So we are very clear, ma'am, you have only data points of 7. So 7, you cannot have any quantitative analysis, right? Now, what could you do? Ma'am, it is always good to have a control group. Whom do you compare it with? If you are not going to give your results vis-a-vis the control group, you will never ever be able to give the right thing of your paper. Control group is why others did not leave and why only they left. The scenario, external environment and internal environment, these are the 2 environments. External,
Yes.
I'm saying one is internal, which is internal to you. You could be pessimistic. You may not be a person who's able to fight difficult scenarios. Your mindsets are become turbulent much faster than anybody else. So your personality traits will matter why you left. These are internal to you. So you can have a personality trait of that gentleman by giving a questionnaire. That is very much possible. At the same time, ma'am, you should also see persons who did not leave. So if people with similar personality traits are not leaving, why is he leaving? Then you have to find another question, what is happening? Then comes your wealth effect. Wealth effect is not your current income, but your accumulated income. So he may have accumulated wealth on which he can survive. But the other person who's staying back does not have anything to fall back on. So in this case, ma'am, we always have both the wealth effects and the income effects. Income effects are current earnings. Wealth effects are your accumulated past earnings. These could be from your ancestors. These could be your past savings, etc. So how long can a person survive will vary from person to person. If I have got ancestral property, I need not work and I can survive for, let's say, till my death. Another person cannot survive even for 1 month if there is no running income coming. So capture this particular element. An easy way of capturing this could be directly ask what is your wealth, or ask by the kind of questions. What is the assets he has? What kind of house that he has? Is he living in his own house or a rental house? The moment it is own house, you are comfortable because there are no monthly obligations of repayment coming up to you. What kind of car you own is a very good indicator of your wealth effects. Your running incomes could be small, but if your wealth effects are strong, you could be owning an asset which is not commensurate with your own earnings. You're getting the point?
Yes, ma'am.
You must ask the push and the pull factor. Sometimes people are being pulled into another job. Sometimes we are being pushed out of this job. And I faced this problem, ma'am, when I was working on one of the consultancy projects of United which was a non-farm. This is published in the IFAD publication, International Fund for Agricultural Development, how we can make agriculture a prosperous industry. And we said that, okay, you make your non-farm sector. So we are not asking, but we are asking the people to leave agriculture and join non-farm activities in the rural sector. For example, animal husbandry, become a school teacher. You know, those are your activities in the rural sector, but not related to agriculture. So when we looked up the earnings in the non-farm sector, ma'am, we saw two very big clusters. One cluster was a low earning cluster in the non-farm. So anybody who is in a bank in the rural, a high earning cluster, but a non-farm. So non-farm itself was a very heterogeneous sector. Now we did not know whether the person who's working in the non-farm productivity was very low, or was he pulled by the non-farm because the better job opportunities were there in the non-farm. So if land is in the non-farm of the sector of farming, and anybody who's in the non-farm at a higher earning level is actually because he has been pulled. So your question should be the person who's quit. Was it a push factor or was it a pull factor? Your pull factor you will come to know when you ask him where is he presently working, or where does he presently in future want to work. Sometimes people leave for 2-3 months, which in economics we know it's the natural rate of unemployment. 2 to 3% of the labor force is at the natural level of unemployment, which means they are in the transition phase of looking for a new opportunity. So they've not quit because they are worse off. They have quit because they are looking for an alternate opportunity. They are confident they will get it and they are willing to give 2 to 3 months. So आपके questions होने चाहिए. When are you expected to get a new job? You already have a new job. So your push and pull factors have to be accounted for. You can have a questionnaire for these people, but you cannot have a very good quantitative analysis. Yes, it will be, it could be purely interview, but you could give structure to your questions, ma'am. I would advise do that if you spend time. So let it be open-ended, let it be interview-based, but supplement it with your closed-ended questions as well. Personality traits must come out when people who are quitting, because scenarios might have been the same.
So, ma'am.
So control and control group जरूर होना चाहिए. आपका publication में नहीं जाएगा. That is where your comparative analysis will come.
Okay, and so I can convert it into comparative analysis study with people. Yeah.
Ma'am, you have to. That is without any control group, you have no analysis whatsoever.
Okay.
And I will give you an example. For example, I work on privatization area. If I say post privatization, the firm's profitability increased by 7%. What is my control group? I should have had those companies which were not privatized. Supposing the non-privatized companies had a profitability of 14%, then privatized companies have a profitability growth of 8%. My output would be profitability is bad. It should not be, privatization is bad. It should not be done. So if my control group is there, companies which are not privatized, and if here I know that profitability went up only by 2% per annum, but for my privatized firms, it went up by 8%. I can categorically say privatization is the right tool for improving productivity. Similarly, if you want to see the impact of training on productivity in an organization, impact of training, if you take only those people who have been trained, and you see that, yes, training and work are positively related, but this is a meaningless answer because I don't even know where is the control group where people were not trained. Right. Maybe without training also people are having very good job satisfaction. So why should the company waste time in training people and spending money if the object job satisfaction and it is coming both with and without training? We can't say. So, ma'am, every study must have a control group. So you should also have a control group, ma'am, with both open-ended and closed-ended questionnaire. और आप अपना क्वेश्चन हम आप में एड्रेस कर देंगे. 450 sample size. 450 sample size, when at least 15 parameters are to be addressed is good enough. So it depends, ma'am, how many parameters to be estimated. This was a question from Kumar Gaurav, sir. Does that answer your query? And I would urge all my participants move away from factor analysis and structural equation modeling. Do that, but supplement it with the multinomial logics, which also generally emerge from the same kind of questionnaire analysis. And become interdisciplinary, talk to people in other departments. Think up of a common platform where you could come up with an interdisciplinary research on contemporary topics. And do something on pandemic. It will be really very, very good for early publication, much in demand, because this is where we don't have enough data. Ajay Vikram ji, sir, just write okay, yes. Can you hear me or not, Mr. Vikram?
Ma'am, I think he's got disconnected. I cannot see him in the participants list.
All right, ma'am. Okay. So any other query which you want me to take it forward, please?
Yes, ma'am, there's one more in the chat box.
Okay. In the case of the previous question, will the name of the organization be kept in? Because I think, madam, those who are pushed or pulled out will not respond the correct answers due to set. What do you think, ma'am? Ma'am, you have to take prior permission for that. For example, case studies. Case studies are meaningless unless we know which particular organization we are talking about. So it is important for a case study approach to give the organization. But if the organization is not willing to reveal their name, it's good just to say it was a premier education institution situated in Delhi, and move forward. But continue with your research, publish it, but do not reveal the data. Ma'am, even in economics, when we have data at 2-digit level, 3-digit level, 4-digit level, at the lowest unit level, the data is kept confidential. So primarily when we get the aggregated data, we have the data at a more aggregated level, but at the unit level, we are a little comfortable. And personality traits, if you don't want it to be known, you have to hide them. You have to respect the organization, because you may get a very big hit for this research if you disclose the organization, but sustainability will not be there, ma'am. Blacklisting could be there. So don't do anything related to your research which that parent organization is not happy with. And especially if you are a stakeholder with that corporation.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes, Kumarji.
Ma'am, just wanted to know, to reply to the previous question I've asked, ma'am, related with, in the case of primary research, the number of respondents to be limited, as well as what should be the number of questions, ma'am, in a questionnaire. Like it is a field research actually.
Right, sir.
So from the different organization, basically dealing with sales organizations.
Sir, I could share my own experience. When at the researcher, we are very enthusiastic and we include so many questions. And sometimes if the project is funded, they are not too happy because some of the questions are more from academic perspective rather than that industry. They are not interested. Like the tourism we did. We had to prune our questionnaire a lot because it was a project sponsored by a particular company. Then you have to adapt to their needs. But the researcher in us, the academician in us forces us to add 10, 12 extra questions, which may not directly affect the objective. Sir, frankly speaking, my take would be it's very difficult to have people fill up the questions unless you pay them. And we have done that. Paid questions also. We got some questionnaires filled by the drivers. And in our research project, I had 200 rupees per driver that we were paying, or 100, I don't remember. And this was a big amount of incentive for any driver to spend 10 minutes. So we would sit in the cab and we would question and things like that. We did that. But if you don't have payment and money is a constraint, so limit the size of the questionnaire, because not many people are going to give you that much amount of time. But please ensure that whatever is the minimum requirement, you have at least 30% extra questions. Because when you are actually into the final stage of research writing, something very important connected point will come up. And going back to that researcher, to the respondent, is not possible. So maintain the telephone number of the respondent. Sometimes even I have done it in my research, sir. When I did my research, there was ample things, my data, etc., did the factor analysis, did structural equation modeling, did the multinomial. I did the ordered logic because it was not a multinomial, it was fitting the ordered logic. But finally, when I was writing a policy implication, I wanted to get deeper insights. And because we had maintained the phone numbers of those people in that questionnaire, we went back and called them up. So my team of 5 researchers, they called them up. We got some insights, qualitative insights, which we put up in the implications for policy to the government agency. So sir, some extra questions is good, but unnecessarily loading is just a waste of time. But keep the details of the respondents with you. You might have to get another set which can be sent through Google Forms or etc. So keep their email IDs with you.
And ma'am, number to be limited to 30 or 40 respondents, or it should be around 100, ma'am? The
Sir,
people
it
whom to be
depends.
contacted.
No. Sir, first of all, you have to decide what would be a random sampling. Would it be a stratified sampling? Would it be a convenience sampling? Whom to talk to? Who are going to be the people who are responding to your questionnaire? So that is important.
Okay.
But have it stratified. That is important. So what I did was I collected a sample of 500, of which per city. So it was a 4 city sponsored by government. Right now, still it is not published. I will not disclose, but it's a government project. Data collected from 4 cities, 2 metro tier 1 cities, 2 tier 2 cities. तो सर हमने उस सर क्या करा था कि क्वेश्चंस को स्ट्रैटिफाइड कर दिया कि हर सिटी में एटलीस्ट 100 विल बी फीमेल्स, मतलब जेंडर कॉम्पोजिशन, एटलीस्ट 100 फीमेल्स, एटलीस्ट 100 हाउसवाइफ्स, एटलीस्ट 100 प्रोफेशनल्स, एटलीस्ट 100 बिजनेसमैन, and at least 100 another category. So that when you're running your multinomial logit or any other, these can be categorized as your dummy variables. How females are responding to a particular question, how students are responding to a particular question, how corporate professionals are responding, and how business owners are responding. So have that kind of a stratified classification, have a heterogeneous group of respondents, but in each group there should be at least 70-80 people to come up. Otherwise, there's again no control. Supposing all of them are male and all of them happen to be bank professionals. So there's no control group. What do you compare it with? How they are behaving vis-a-vis others, you don't have that.
Okay, ma'am.
And also, as I said, in your final multinomial logit or your ordered logit, supposing there are the regression equation has 10 variables, against 10, at least 30 additional respondents. So 300 is your minimum sample size. But this varies, it could be 20, 30, but there are some rules some people have talked about. But rule of thumb, 20:1, you're covered, sir. Nobody will question that.
Ma'am, what I assess out of it is like whatever the number of questions is, suppose 15 questions are put in my questionnaire and the number of respondents are 30. So 15 into 3, this is what you mean to?
No, sir. This is the, 30 is no sample size. No, sir, you can't. You don't have degrees of freedom. Your N has to be large. You should
Okay.
have enough degrees of freedom, sir. So 30 questionnaires for a regression which has 10 variables. It is not fulfilling the conditions, sir. You have to increase the sample, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so any other, sir? Okay, so I'm now assuming that your research is over. Whatever research, it could have been primary, it could have been secondary. You could have used factor analysis, you could have used structural equation modeling, it could have been a conceptual based, it could have been field survey, it could have been open-ended, it could have been very rigorous quantitative using econometric techniques such as OLS or GMM or IV estimation. You have used interaction terms, you assumed non-linearity in your variables, etc., etc., etc. Everything ready, you prepared your paper, and now you're going to submit. Submit is a time-consuming process, and my students spend at least a week even in identifying what journal we should be submitting it. What do we have to see? So first of all, the frequency of the journal is important if you want a quick publication. And I'm not saying at the cost of quality. Don't go down below a C category journal. Scopus and UGC is your minimum levels, but C category, B category, A category. Aspire for that. And sir, one day, the day when you have one P category or A category, your future publications will become so much easier. Because whenever even I review articles, sir, I come to know who's the person who's written, even though it is not mentioned. Because you look at the bibliography, you get some idea who could be. And that author, if he's a good author and written in one B category, first of all, the publishers can also Google search your name and see what is it. So getting a non-quality publication will keep you in a low equilibrium trap for a very long time. So very good to spend more time in a wonderful paper as your first paper. So what they say is the gestation period. Invest in the gestation period, enter the market, which may transform your perception in the market, which means the journal that you publish must be a quality journal, and quality journal requires quality work. So don't compromise on quality work for your first 3 papers. And when you will not compromise on your first 3 papers, sir, you will never ever be able to compromise ever. But if you compromise in the initial stage, sir, publications at a later point will also become problematic. And nowadays you are so lucky, everything is at the hit of your button, ABDC list. Our time, sir, we used to go to the library to see what are the journals where we can publish. We had no idea internet was not there, sir. Googles were not there, Google searches were not there. So invest. So this is education is an investment. Research is investment without returns. There are no monetary returns, sir, to research. I invest my time on research. Do I get monetary incentive? Only when I get a consultancy project, I get monetary incentive. But otherwise, there are research publications which have no monetary incentive. And if I'm the principal investigator of a project, I don't even earn a rupee, only my expenses are reimbursed. So that's what I'm saying, sir. It is a passion. It has to come from within. Don't do it for the heck of it. Then it is not the right job for you. So many of my publications are not a single penny. I have spent money from my pocket. Sometimes all expenses are paid, including my trips if I'm going to Bombay. But per se, whether I've got any explicit, tangible monetary return, no. Consultants get, research project investigators don't get it. But do I enjoy? It is my breathing. I love the day I am able to contribute something to some research, some thought. I think it's been a productive day. Rest of the time, it's all administration, sir. As a principal, I'm primarily an administrator. So how do I research? How do I do research? Collaborate. That is the way which I had also said. And my commuting time is where I end up talking to my research scholars, with my collaborators. So being at top positions and yet continuing with research is Organizing your day chart. I don't say I succeed all times. I have very bad days. I'm unable to do productive work, but at least I try and have a calendar. So I'm really liking it when students and participants are saying they've enjoyed the session. That makes me happy because frankly, being a teacher simply is one thing. Make the person to whom you're interacting enjoyable. And I have learned so much from you just listening to the 6 or 7 questions that you put up. So one last question and then I could formally close. Varda?
Hello.
Definitely, ma'am.
Yes, Hemlata. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Ma'am, I just want to know, like, when it comes to publication, there are some journals which are Scopus listed also. And we know that APC, if their article open access with article processing charges. But some journals put article processing charges as publication charges. But the journals are listed in Web of Science database as well as in Scopus. So should we go for such journals?
Ma'am, my students also ask me this question. Ma'am, there is a paid journal and there is a difference between a paid journal and a fee that is charged. In fact, you'll be surprised, ma'am, some of the A category even I can't publish because $500 or something is the publication. And sometimes I don't even know whether the paper will be published or not. But ma'am, I think our parents have invested in our education for first 23, 24 years. I think we should marginally invest in our own publications also. I don't see it as a negative, ma'am. It is common across most of the developed countries. Don't get into the paid कि 2000 दे दिया पे हो गया वो मैम कैटेगरी अलग है ए कैटेगरी का जर्नल अगर आपसे कुछ पैसा मांग रहा है वो फिर भी क्वालिटी पर करेगा
Yeah.
और
The
कभी कभी
review
क्या होता
process
है
is long.
मैम आप एक बात सोचिए अगर एक ए कैटेगरी का जर्नल है और वर्ल्ड में कितने एकेडमिशियंस हैं दैट जर्नल विल बी फ्लडेड विद आर्टिकल्स हाउ इज दैट एडिटर गोइंग टू हैंडल so sometimes ma'am signaling and screening is done by the fee they charge काफी कुछ तो वही signal हो गया मैम instead of receiving 500 papers every hour because there is a fee being charged it has reduced to 10 it becomes easier for the editor to process the journal that has the article that has been submitted faster so again there is no clear cut thing about is it good for sending your publication and paid or not you have to see the quality of the paid journal and why they have done it ma'am screening मेरे पास आप बताओ मैम रोज अगर मेरे पास 500 पेपर आ जाएगा मेरे SRCC के जर्नल के लिए मेरा एडिटर तो काम कैसे करेगा तो
Yes,
आप वहीं पर आप रैशनिंग की टेक्निक लगानी है ना सो रैशनिंग की टेक्निक आप कैसे लगाएंगे रिव्यू कोई करके और उससे पहले भी it's a you can think of it as a pre-screening signaling mechanism but you have to think with caution ma'am because when you will be interviewed people sitting on the other side will ask you is it a paid journal it has happened so your defense argument would be I look at it as it's an A category it is not any other era journal you are paying the money for
Yes, ma'am.
and invest you have to learn to invest in your research and believe me when you invest for the first 7 to 8 years ma'am you will also get consultancy projects you will get more projects that's the return on your investment
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Thank you,
see
ma'am.
Lata finally show somebody showed their face to me
Yes, very informative session, ma'am. Thank you for so many insights.
I'm glad, ma'am, anytime. And I remain committed to all the participants who joined the session. I am an academician, I am an administrator, and as the head of the institution who also offered this faculty development program, I remain committed to handhold and take forward our participants for the queries they have, not just for my session, but others also. We have a wonderful team teaching and training you, ma'am. So thank you so much.